Hey guys, welcome to Film Learnin, the show dedicated to learning you some filmmaking and learning you good. And if you can't tell from this ridiculous getup what we're doing today, let's check out these requests. So I asked you guys on the community tab what you'd like to see next on Film Learnin. Not only did you vote in favour of Justice League effects, you also specifically asked for a Cyborg Hologram effect. So that's what we're doing today. Now before we get started with the effect, if you haven't subscribed to the channel already, just hit that sub button right below. We're trying to hit 80k by the end of the year, so any support is appreciated. Now in order to complete this effect guys, firstly you have to head to filmlearnin.com/downloads and grab that download pack which contains our Cyborg Hologram animation. You'll also want to shoot your actor just expanding their hands out and looking at the hologram that's not there. You also want to get an over the shoulder shot as well as a close up as well. Now that we've got that out of the way, let's get to work. Okay guys, here we are in After Effects and I've got my comp all set up and ready to go. As you can see, I've already applied the eye and the mask effects to this shot, and say you missed the episode where we covered that, you can click on the card in the corner and go straight to that episode. So our first tip here is to do some tracking, and we'll be doing this in Mocha AE. Now this is a third-party tracker that's been a part of After Effects since CS6, so you CS6 users can rest easy. So what do we need to do first? Well, let's do the hardest part first, shall we? And that's rotoscoping this hand right here, as our hologram actually needs to appear behind it. Now I'll fully admit, in the teaser I did this very roughly in After Effects just using mask paths, and let's face it, many people did notice this. So we'll be doing it right today. So let's click on our footage, head to animation and click track in Mocha AE. Mocha will open up, and then you have the chance to name your project and make sure all your video settings are correct, because if they're not correct, your track is going to go nowhere. From there, I'm going to grab the magnifier and zoom in on our hand. Next, we'll grab the X-Spline tool right here and we're going to draw a very detailed mask around our hand until we hit the sleeve of our jacket right here. I'm then going to select all the points by hitting Ctrl A, and then I'm going to bring the rounding in to smooth this spline out to better fit my hand. Nice. We'll then hit the track forward button and watch it work. Now, I personally know this is going to track well, but the spline itself is going to need some serious adjusting as my hand changes perspective and shape and does get a little bit blurry when I start to move it. Okay, so now that our track is done, I'll have to go in and tweak the spline each time the track drifts off my hand. And we do this like so. We just find the point where it's tracking off, and then we're just going to adjust those spline points. Now guys, for the purposes of time, I'm going to speed this up as it took roughly 30 minutes to finish all these adjustments. And that's actually really good. If you've ever done roto by hand, frame by frame, it usually takes a lot longer and is a lot more fiddly. Now guys, if you are interested in a much more in-depth look at adjusting the tracking in Mocha, I highly recommend Tobias from Surface Studios' Mocha AE tutorials, because that's where I learnt this. In fact, this is the first roto I've ever done, and that's all thanks to his teaching. So click the card above and check out all his stuff on Mocha. So here's a look at the finished track. It looks pretty good and it's much easier than doing a regular roto in AE, as I've said. Now I've followed the exact same steps and I've done a separate track on my forearm as well, which as you can see required a lot less adjustment. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put the forearm underneath my hand track, and that's basically telling Mocha that the hand track is more important than the forearm track. From there, we need to send this info all the way back to After Effects. So let's head down and click Export Shape Data, and then I'm going to select all the layers by clicking this, and then I'm going to hit Copy to Clipboard. And then we're going to head right back to After Effects. Now once we're back in After Effects, let's select our footage, hit Ctrl V or Paste, and we now have our masked arm in our comp and it's done. Now it does need a little refining, but we are getting ahead of ourselves. Firstly, let's duplicate our footage, and on the bottom layer, we're going to head to the effects menu and we're going to remove the effects. Okay, now let's select that top layer and refine this mask. Our first step here is to pre-compose it, making sure that all attributes are in that new composition. Next, let's head over to presets and type choke and grab matte choker. I'm then going to adjust the settings to remove any junk from our hand and just around the forearm. Now you will have to play with these settings to find out what works for you, but just in case you do want to follow along, I've set the choke to 100 and I've set the grey level softness to 39%. And if we turn that on and off as we check out this preview, you can see it actually trims off a lot of that junk from the outside and makes it look a lot better. Okay, if we check out a preview, you can see we've successfully rotoscoped our arm. That's the hardest part of this one done, guys. Now, let's add that hologram. So guys, I've imported the hologram pack over here and you'll notice that I have several different PNG images of the hologram at different angles. Mainly because I've told you how to shoot this, but I have no idea how you're going to shoot this in what perspective. So I just figured I'd give a couple of angles just as an option. I've also included the Cinema 4D file in this pack, just in case you want to make a custom render. Now before we import a hologram pic, we gotta do some mocha action first. Because instead of animating this hologram in Cinema 4D, what we're going to do is use mocha to drive the animation using our hands. So let's click on our bottom footage layer, head back up to animation and click track in Mocha AE. This will open a new instance of mocha, so let's just name this hologram and hit OK. Now all we need to do here is grab the X-spline tool, draw a mask around our hand area like so. There we are. And then we're just going to hit the track forward button. You can see the spline shape expands and reacts to our hand movement, and this is what will drive our hologram's base animation. So let's head down and click export tracking data, copy that to the clipboard, and let's head back to After Effects. Okay, we're back. Now, we've got to paste this somewhere, right? So let's grab a new null object, making sure that we're on the first frame of our comp, and then we'll hit Ctrl V or paste. Done. Now it's time to bring in our hologram. Now I'm just going to grab this one since I made this one to fit my shot. So let's drop that under our rotoscoped hand like so, and then we're going to scale it down and position it into place. Nice. We're also going to pre-compose this and we're just going to call it hologram, and that's for just later on. We'll then also change the transfer mode to screen. From there, let's simply parent our hologram pre-comp to our null and bam! If we check out a preview, you can see that our hologram, which is a still, is now scaling up and reacting to our hand movements. Cool, eh? So our next step is to open up the hologram, pretty it up a little bit, and animating it generating from our actor's hands. Now in order to do that, let's open up our hologram pre-comp, and our first step here is to head to Effect, Blur and Sharpen, and grab CC Radial Fast Blur. And all we're going to do is set that to 2 and set the center point to around here. Nice. From there, let's duplicate the layer, then we're going to add some glow. Head to Effect, Stylize, and add that glow. Now all you need to do here is just set the radius to 30. Now our next step is to animate our hologram coming out of our actor's hands. So let's head up, grab a new adjustment layer, stay up there, head to Transition, and add a gradient wipe. Let's set the transition softness to 84%. We'll then skip ahead around 6 frames and we'll hit the stopwatch and then set the transition completion to 82%. We'll then skip ahead, say to frame 25, and then we'll set the transition to 0. Now if we check out a preview, you can see the lines come in softly, but they don't generate from the hands. So let's fix that. Let's head back to frame 6, we'll then head up, grab the rectangle mask tool, this one here, and then we're going to draw a rectangle around it, around this big. That way, we can only see the hologram from the ends, as in coming out of our hands. So let's then feather that out by hitting F and then put it to around 85 pixels. Next, let's hit the stopwatch on mask expansion. We'll then skip ahead once more to frame 25 and then set the mask expansion way down to around -260. You'll now find that our hologram kind of draws itself into being whole from the hands all the way in. Last step on this part of the hologram, gang, let's jump back to the first frame, jump down and select both of our hologram layers, hit T to bring up opacity, and then we're going to crank them down to 0. Oh, and hit that stopwatch. We'll then skip ahead 7 frames and crank them back up to 100%. Done! Our hologram now lights up from our hands and then fills all the way out to the center. Okay, now on to an easier part, adding the info screens. Now I say easy because I've essentially done the hard part, guys. I built these screens in Cinema 4D, rendered them out and tracked them in Mocha, and they're now ready for you to add anything you'd like on these screens to display. So what we'll do is head into our hologram pack and grab, say, screen 1. We'll then skip to the point where the hologram is fully visible, and then we can start populating these screens by dropping them into the comp. We'll scale them down, position them into place, and if you like, you can even make these 3D and change the perspective if you like. You can just really go nuts here and put these things wherever you like. Now once you're happy with that screen, add another, and basically as many as you like. If we jump back to our final shot, you can see what it's looking like. And this is something I highly recommend you do. Make sure you keep checking back with your final shot to make sure that these screens look right in your final shot. Because you might just put a whole bunch of them willy-nilly in the hologram and then find when you jump back to the final shot, they don't quite fit where you want them to be. You'll also notice that all of the scaling and the tracking data has been applied to your screens, just like in the hologram. Very awesome indeed. Now let's head back to our hologram comp because we've got a bit of work to do to get this looking 100%. Now the idea here is that our screens need to appear when those hologram lines actually reach them. So for example, when the hologram lines reach this screen over here, let's trim that layer to begin on this frame like so. We can then move on to the next screen. Same thing, scrub along the timeline until our hologram lines reach this screen, and then we'll trim it to start at that point. Rinse and repeat these steps until you're done with all of your screens. The end result should look like this. Okay, we've got those screens in place and appearing when we want them. Now let's add some images or video to those screens. Now to do this, guys, is super easy. Simply open up the screen comp, open up the screen insert comp inside that, and then just drag an image or a video on top of everything. And just make sure you go up here and make sure you fit your image to the comp. Done. If we head back, that image is now displaying and animating. Easy, right? So just repeat those steps to populate your other screens, and you're good to go. Now to finish this off, we're simply going to copy the radial blur and the glow from our hologram and drop that straight on top of our screen comps. Now if you do want these to pop out a little bit more, you can always duplicate them as well. I've also added some alien symbols that flicker a little bit. Now basically these are just Dragon Ball Z Scouter fonts that I've just added an expression to, just for the hell of it. You'll find these in the hologram pack and you can just add them randomly and add the same glow settings. You can do this if you want, I just did it for a little bit of extra detail. Now the last thing we have to do is make the hologram scroll when we move our hand. This is a bit fiddly, but it's not crazy hard. The first thing we need to do is create a second set of information screens. Essentially, so we have something different to display when our actor is done scrolling. Now to do that, let's firstly duplicate our original hologram layer, open that up, and then we'll remove the opacity animation down here like so. We'll also remove all of our screens. Now we do that because we really don't want those screens appearing back in the same scale and the same location, just showing different information, because it's not really how it works in the movie. When Cyborg's scrolling, he's actually scrolling through a massive thread of information and the screens are appearing all over the place. So you may have noticed that our hologram pack actually contains 10 screens. Well, that's not entirely the case. We've actually made some double ups of several of the screens. That way you can replace the image in the pre-comp without needing to duplicate any of these screens and the corner pin data again. So guys, I'm just going to speed this thing up while I build my second hologram and of course populate those screens and finish with adding our glow and our blur. Done. Now, how do we transition from one hologram to the next? Well, for starters, we need to grab hologram 2, drop that into our final comp underneath our hand, and parent it to our null. We'll also need to change the transfer mode to screen. Now you might notice here that my second hologram isn't lining up with my first hologram, so it's just a point of just jumping in there and adjusting it until it matches exactly. There we go. From there, well, firstly we need to render out a still frame from each of these comps at the moment my hand starts flipping. So we'll head to that point in our final comp, note the frame it's on, and then we'll head to that exact point in our first hologram, head to composition, and then select save frame as and save us out a Photoshop still. From there we're going to jump back to our final comp and scrub along the timeline a few more frames till we want the transition to end. Then we'll jump into our second hologram and do the exact same steps, saving as still. Then we'll just hit render, and we'll import both of those back in. That way you end up with two stills that look exactly like this. Next, let's grab one of those stills and we're just going to drop it over here and make ourselves a new comp. We'll then grab the other hologram still and drop it in as well. Done. So our next step here is to modify the composition settings so that the edges butt up right against the sides of our holograms. So to do that, we just head up to composition, composition settings, and we just bring in that width until we're happy. I'm happy with that. Let's hit OK, and then I'm going to hit P and I'm going to reposition our holograms so they're sitting in the center of the comp. From there, we're going to head up to layer and add ourselves a new adjustment layer. And then we're going to magic ourselves over to presets and we're going to type offset. and we're going to grab that offset preset and chuck it on our adjustment layer. So basically, the idea is we're going to animate the offset of these two stills to sell the illusion of a bunch of information just whooping by to facilitate the transition between our two hologram comps. So let's get started. First step, we're going to hit the stopwatch on Shift Center 2. We'll then scrub along the timeline around 10 frames, and then we're just going to crank that Shift Center 2 up a whole bunch. I've set it on 2270, but you've got to make sure that your image is back in the center where it was. I'm then going to right click on that keyframe and select Easy Ease. That way our animation doesn't come to an abrupt end and look really harsh. Our next step is animating some directional blur, because unfortunately the offset doesn't actually work with motion blur. So let's head up to Effect, Blur and Sharpen, and add ourselves directional blur. We're then going to set the direction to -90. Let's then hit the stopwatch on blur length, leave it at 0, then we're going to skip ahead 2 frames, 1, 2, and then we're going to crank it all the way up to 100. I'm then going to skip ahead once more to frame 13 and set it back down to 0. That's looking pretty good, but our last step here is to animate the opacity of each of our holograms so they transition from one to the other. So let's highlight both of our holograms, hit T to bring up opacity, and hit the stopwatch on both. From there, we'll keep hologram 1 at 100% opacity, and we'll set hologram 2 to 0%. Next, let's scrub along 6 frames in, and then we're going to swap them over. Set hologram 1 to 0%, and set hologram 2 all the way up to 100. Let's now check out a preview of that. As you can now see, our offset starts, blurs out, and we transition from one hologram to the next. Let's then right click and trim that comp to the work area so that it finishes on the final frame of our animation. Okay, now all we have to do is jump back to our final shot and integrate this transition between our two hologram effects. To do that, we're going to scrub along the timeline to that same point where we started our transition, this point right here. And then we'll head over to the project window and drag and drop our transition at this point. Of course, change the transfer mode to screen. There we're going to scale it up and position it into place so that it matches both of our holograms we currently have in our comp. There we go. We're then going to trim hologram 1 so that it finishes on the first frame of our transition, and then we're going to trim hologram 2 so that it starts on the end of our transition, like so. We'll then of course parent it to the null object, and check out a preview. Okay, I'm happy with the transition, but not so much with those harsh edges around here. So all I'm going to do is grab the pen tool and just draw a rough mask where I want to hide those edges. There we go, and then I'm just going to hit F and feather it out by 50 pixels. Done. Now, let's check out a preview of that. That looks much better. Okay guys, we are on to the final step. And thankfully, it's pretty easy. All we're going to do is add an adjustment layer to add a little bit of light generation from both of our hands. Just to better sell the effect that the hologram is emanating from both of our hands. So let's head up, add a new adjustment layer, making sure it's underneath our rotoscoped hand, and then we'll just parent it to our null object. From there, we're going to grab the pen tool, draw a mask around this hand, and then we're going to draw a mask that'll sit under our rotoscoped hand. I'm then going to scrub forward a few frames to when our hands expand, and I'm just going to adjust these masks just to make sure they're not overflowing our hands, because otherwise that glow's going to pop right out of our hands and look a bit weird. There we go. We'll then hit F and feather these both out at 50 pixels. Next, let's head to Effect, Color Correction, and add Photo Filter. All I'm going to do here is crank it up to 100% and set this to orange from the drop-down menu. And after that, we're going to head back up to Effect, back to Color Correction, and grab Exposure. And I'm just going to crank this up to a point where I can see a nice glow coming from our hand. That looks pretty good. Make sure and have a play with these settings and find out what works for your shot. And the final step is just animating the opacity. So all we're going to do is hit T, and on the first frame, we're going to crank that opacity down to 0. Then we're going to skip ahead to the point where the hologram first starts coming out, and we're going to crank this thing all the way up to 100%. And finally, let's check out a preview of our finished shot. And that, my friends, is the final episode of Film Learnin for 2017. Done!
Add up all those steps and you get something like this. Wow. So guys, that's my take on the Cyborg Hologram effect from Justice League. As you can see, it's really easy to do once I've done all the heavy lifting and built this thing in Cinema 4D. But
That's a given. Now guys, if you do want to play with the Cinema 4D file, I have also included that in the download pack, but you will need Cinema 4D standalone as it does use some effectors and it does use some atom arrays that aren't available in Cinema 4D Lite. Now before we close this one out, I want to once again thank everyone that supports me on Patreon. Without you guys, I wouldn't have bought this sweet mask prop, and really, any of the props that I've used this year. You guys supporting the show actually gives us a budget to buy these ridiculous things, and I think it makes the show better overall. Now if you do have a request, be sure and leave it down in those comment section, and also check the community tab of the page because I'm posting there constantly now. But for now guys, that is my time. If you did enjoy the video, please smash that like button, I really do appreciate it, and share if you can. If you are new here, why not hit that subscribe button? And if you are subscribed, make sure you turn those notifications on so you don't miss a single Film Learnin episode, because we are just getting started. We've got 2 other Justice League videos right here, as well as our Star Wars effects list right up here. My social media crap is above my head. Facebook, Twitter, remember, posting all the time guys. But until I see you next time, keep learning.